Well, good evening. Welcome to the kitchen table on Thursday evening. The devotions that we've been using are called Women of the Bible, and there's a lot of women in the Bible. Some of the names we know, many of them we do not. Some of them we only know by a title or such as the maid or the wife of somebody. But we don't know their names. But yet we know their deeds and their acts and what they've done. And when we look at these things, they help us deepen our faith as well, because we can see how God worked and moved in their lives, and He'll do the same in ours as well. He works and moves, and we have our being in God as well. As we talk about these different characters, be helpful to you if you would try to put yourself in the story. I mean, that's why we tell stories, and we like stories, because we can put ourselves in the story. And so if you put yourself in the story, you can see how you relate to that person's story. And then you can see how what they experienced. You can see the things that you've experienced and how you relate to those as well. And you can see how God reacted to them, and you can see how you react to God. And so it'd be helpful if you do that. It'll help you understand the story just a little bit better. So I hope you and your family, and I hope you're safe and sound, and it won't be long, we hope, in a short time we'll be able to all meet together in the sanctuary again, and so in the meantime, stay safe. Well, as we begin looking at women in the Bible, the woman we're looking at tonight does indeed have a name, unlike some of the other women that we've looked at. Her story can be found in the book of Ruth. The woman's name that we're looking at tonight is Naomi. Now, Naomi's name means my joy, or pleasantness of Jehovah. Either way, it's a happy, positive name. You know, people were given names back in that day because they meant something. And oftentimes when a child was given a name, that child would grow up to fit that name. And that's why our names today, when children are named, their names are important as well, because if they have a good name, they'll grow into that name. Where sometimes people get names and they're not sure how to live into that name, and they go around embarrassed by it or whatever. So good names are a good thing, because they help us stay on the positive side of things. Well, Naomi's name means my joy, or pleasantness of Jehovah, as I said, and I hope you don't get tired of hearing what the meaning of names mean, because I think it helps us put the story in context a little better if we know what some of the names mean. And so I'll be sharing some of those names and what they mean here in a few moments. Well, Naomi was married to Elimelech. Elimelech was a well-to-do person living in Bethlehem. Bethlehem, by the way, means house of bread. It was a rich, fertile land, and of course it was known for its crops, and thus it's called house of bread. He would have been a person, as I said, he was well-to-do, but a person of means, because his brother was a prince of Judah. His name was Salmon. I don't know what that name means, but Salmon, prince of Judah. He married Rahab. Remember, we talked about Rahab here recently. And together they were the parents of Boaz, who married Ruth. And Ruth, her name means friend. Well, Naomi had two sons. One's name was Mahlon, which means infirmity, and he was first married to Ruth. The second son's name was Chilion. His name means sickness or destruction, and he was married to Orpah. Later on, not just right this moment, but famine came over the land in the land of the house of bread, or in the land of Bethlehem. And Elimelech decided that he didn't want to stay in Bethlehem and starve to death. He wanted to go where there was plenty, and so he decided to pack up his family and his belongings, and he headed off for the land of Moab. Moab was a son of Lot and of Lot's daughter. That's a long story. But anyway, he was conceived in incest, I guess you could say, as was his brother. And it was problematic. But Moab, or the Moabites, and the Jews didn't get along very well together. But nonetheless, Elimelech took his family to the land of Moab, where there indeed was plenty. The people didn't worship the same gods as Naomi and her family. They had different beliefs, different culture. And so it was shocking for Naomi and her family to pick up and leave Bethlehem and go to the land of Moab, the land of the pagans, if you will, who didn't worship their God, but they worshipped a plethora of gods. It was also a shock for her to leave her family and friends behind, and she had to start all over with strangers and making relationships, which would have been very difficult at that time as well. And of course they left their estate behind, so they didn't have as much wealth in Moab as they would have had in Bethlehem. Well, Elimelech had moved away from Bethlehem because he didn't want to starve there in Bethlehem where they had nothing, and he went to live in the land of Moab where they had a great deal of things there, where a great deal of food and other things so that they could live comfortably with. Problem was, he went where he thought it was going to be safe, and he died after he was there just a short time, bringing much sadness to the heart of Naomi, as you might expect. And even more shocking, after Elimelech died, that Naomi's two sons married Moabite women, which was forbidden. It was forbidden to intermarry racially. And so, anyway, Chilion, I think I said a moment ago, married Orpah, and her name means fawn, like the deer, fawn, her name. And Mahlon married Ruth, and her name means friend. Now it sounds like when we talk about the Moabites, it sounds like that they were going to travel a great distance, doesn't it? Moabites from Bethlehem. But Moab was 30 miles. But that was really quite a distance in that day, with no paved roads, no transportation to speak of, unless they happened to have some horses and donkeys. That was about it. And if you've ever been to that area, you know that the land is mountainous for a while, and you get down in around the Dead Sea, and it's just hot and dry. It's just desert wilderness down in there. And so, but anyway, they made it, from Bethlehem to Moab, and they lived there, and the two sons married, and then they died. Of course, that matches their name, doesn't it? With Malon meaning infirmity, and Chilion meaning sickness or destruction. Who would name their children those names anyway? I mean, those aren't very positive names to grow into, are they? And so anyway, they died early, and we don't know, of course, what they died of. They just became sick and died. And now Naomi's heart was really crushed after losing all the men in her family, husband and two sons. There were no men left. And as a widow, it would have been very difficult for her to support herself. You know how she must have felt? You know, everything was going good, and you had wealth to buy what you needed. You had everything you needed or wanted, and you could get by. And then all of a sudden, sudden destruction hit. And it was all gone. And you're left in a shock and a daze. Now, what happened to Naomi, the sufferings and the hardships that she went through, would change her character completely. And we'll see that in a moment. Well, after she got over the shock, or after she was shocked by the hardships and the deaths of the men in her world, there was no one left to support her but two daughters-in-law, and they were both foreign women. Word came that the famine in Bethlehem was over, that there was now plenty of food there, and God had restored the land. And so Naomi decided that she was going to return to the land of her relatives, return back to Bethlehem, where there were people there that she knew. And so she packed up what she had and headed off to Bethlehem. Her two daughters-in-law, she encouraged them to go back to the home of their mothers, but they refused. And they went with Naomi for a while. And after a period of time, Orpah decided that she wanted to return back to the home of her mother. And so the three women embraced, and Orpah went back to her mother's house. But Ruth refused to go back. Ruth said to Naomi, "Listen, I just love you so much. I want to be where you are. I want to go where you go. I want your people to be my people. I want your God to be my God. I want to die where you die." And so Ruth continued on with Naomi. And when they arrived at Bethlehem, Naomi's friends and relatives came out and said, "Hi, Naomi. Hi, Naomi." And Naomi said, "Don't you call me joy. My joy, my pleasantness has left me. I lost the men that I held dear, and lost all that I had. My joy is now turned to bitterness. You'll call me Mara," which means bitterness. Well, being back in her own land, most of what they had before they left was gone. She had no way to support herself, but being an older widow. And so Ruth decided that she would try to find work to support both her and her mother-in-law. And so Ruth took to gleaning the fields at harvest time in order to support both her and Naomi. And while Ruth was working the field one day, she met her husband there, Boaz. And together they had a son by the name of Obed, who was the father of Jesse, who was the father of King David, in whose lineage Jesus Christ, the Messiah, would be born on earth. Well, as Naomi looked after Obed, it was her grandson in a way, but really not her bloodline. It was through her daughter-in-law, not through her son, that Obed would have been her grandson. But Naomi looked after Obed while Ruth and Boaz were working or doing whatever they were doing. And as she was like a nanny to Obed. And the more she looked after Obed, God did what God does very often. He took Naomi's bitterness and he took and changed her name back from Mara back to my joy. God restored her joy after all the hardships that and the suffering that she had been through. Can you relate to that? You know the sufferings that Naomi must have suffered, and then God restored her joy. And God will restore your joy as well, no matter what you're going through. No matter what you're going through. And so I hope you take a few moments, 15, 20 minutes or so, just to read the book of Ruth. You'll be glad you did, and it's a wonderful story. May God grant you and yours peace and safety and shelter you in His arms. So have a great week this week.